On December 7, 1941, the surprise Japanese attack, on the ships anchored at the United States Navy base at Pearl Harbor, opened a new theater of the Second World War, igniting the conflict in the Pacific. This attack was just a prelude, which corresponded with attacks on other Allied possessions in the Pacific region, such as the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, Malaya, and Hong Kong. Among initial Japanese targets were two American-controlled islands, vital to them to consolidate and strengthen their defensive perimeter: Wake Island and Guam. Guam came under United States possession on June 21, 1898, during the Spanish-American War, after U.S. Navy captured the island from the Kingdom of Spain. The following year, Spain sold the other islands in the Marianas chain, as well as all other islands they possessed in the Pacific, to Germany. From 1899 onwards, the United States Navy was responsible for the island government. Although there were some elements of a civilian government on the island, a U.S. Navy captain served as both the governor and commander of the naval base, established near the village of Pitti in the same year. In 1901, Marine Corps opened barracks at the village of Sumay. Meanwhile, during World War I, Japanese forces captured German-controlled islands in the Marianas, and in October 1914, they established a garrison, designated as the South Seas Defense Force, with the administrative center for the Marianas District, situated at Garapan on Saipan. After the war, in December 1920, the League of Nations granted Japan a mandate to govern former German possessions in the Pacific, known as South Seas Mandate, or simply the Japanese Mandate. In April 1922, the Japanese divided Mandate into 6 administrative districts: Palaus, Marianas, Marshalls, West, Central, and East Carolines. Immediately, Japan began to colonize the islands, and by the late 1930s, in the Marianas, Japanese settlers outnumbered the natives. From 1935, the Japanese government banned Westerners from entering its mandated islands in the Pacific, and in 1939, they established the Fourth Fleet to defend the region. With an area of 540 square kilometers, 52 kilometers long from north to south, and 16 kilometers wide, at its widest point, Guam is the largest island in the Marianas. Its narrow central isthmus, 6.5 kilometers wide, separates the island into 2 very different parts, mainly mountains south end, with fertile valleys, cultivated with rice and vegetables, and a 122 to 152 meters high, limestone plateau in the north, covered with extremely dense tropical forest. Of the population of 23,394 inhabitants, in 1941, the majority of them were local Chamorros, who preferred to be called Guamanians, and who, besides being farmers, were also excellent navigators and fishermen. The rest 812 inhabitants were non-natives, mainly American, Chinese, and Japanese. Situated on the west side of the isthmus, next to Agonia Bay, was the largest settlement, and administrative center on the island, Agonia, with a population of 12,550. The second largest town was Sumay, with 2,000 inhabitants, while most of the other population lived in numerous villages along the coast, in the vicinity of Agonia. Fewer than 3,000 Chamorros lived in the north. Approximately 137 kilometers of improved roads covered the island. The island's largest port was Apra Harbor, situated on the Ortot Peninsula's north side, and at its north end was Pitti Navy Yard. In the interwar years, U.S. Navy did little to develop the naval infrastructure or defenses on Guam, as, under the terms of the 1922 Washington Navy Conference, both the United States and Japan agreed not to fortify their Western Pacific possessions. Therefore, the island had no airfields, nor coastal guns, with only a Navy seaplane unit deployed on the island in 1922, which was withdrawn by 1930. In 1936, Pan American Airways established a seaplane station at Sumay, on the San Francisco-Manila-Hong Kong route. The island garrison consisted of only 400 Marine and Navy personnel, and just over 300 militia and police units, formed from the local population, with their biggest weapons consisting of a few machine guns. There were no fortifications or aircraft on the island, with only one minesweeper, tasked to protect the port. At the dawn of the Second World War, Guam, the exposed American possession, situated at the southern end of the Marianas, was declared a Category F defensive rating, which meant that no defense and reinforcements were planned, or expected, and that in case of war, the Navy should destroy its facilities and materials, before the withdrawal. From the beginning of 1941, the increased tensions between the United States and Japan eventually led to the imminent threat of the upcoming war, which was especially acute in Guam. The Navy realized that in the event of war, an almost unguarded island would be easy prey for the Japanese. In May and April, Japanese aircraft began flying photo reconnaissance missions over Guam from their bases on Saipan. Further war warnings were issued in the following months, as the Japanese preparations for war became much more obvious, and resulted in the partial evacuation of more than 1,000 American construction workers and administrative staff from the island. By October 17, all United States non-military citizens were evacuated from the island. Only a garrison, under the command of United States Navy Captain George J. McMillan, Governor of Guam, consisting of 271, mainly unarmed Navy personnel, who operated 2 radio stations on the island, the administrative and hospital staff, and company of 153 Marines, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel William McNulty, were left on the island. In addition to them, there were 246 volunteers, from Guam Militia and Island Police, of Guam Insular Force Guard, a unit hastily resurrected by the U.S. Navy in April 1941, to defend Guam. Guardsmen were neither well-trained, nor properly armed. These men were under the command of Chief Petty Officer Robert Bruce Lane. According to Japanese plans, the attack on Guam was to begin simultaneously with the attack on Malaya, the Philippines, Borneo, Java, and Wake Island. It was only one segment of a much larger Japanese offensive to open the war, with the most important being the first phase of the operation, the attack on the United States Pacific Fleet in Hawaii, scheduled to begin on the same day, but on a different date, as the international dateline ran between 2 areas. The task for invasion of Guam was given to the South Seas Detachment, known as Harai Force, under Major General Harai Tomitaro, consisting of the 55th Infantry Group. This brigade-size unit presented the bulk of the attacking force, was drawn from 55th Division, and built around the 144th Infantry Regiment, which numbered 4,886 men. Assembled in Korea in November, the unit was briefly sent to Japan and then, late in November, departed to Chichijima. Besides the 55th Infantry Group, the 5th Company of the 2nd Missouri Special Naval Landing Force, numbering 370 men, was also assigned to join the assault on Guam, which brought a total overall Japanese strength to more than 5,500 Army and Navy troops. The 22nd Air Flotilla and the 4th Fleet were to provide air and naval support. The South Seas Detachment departed Chichijima on November 27, and reached Hahajima the next day. From there, unit headed for Guam on December 5. En route, the troops were briefed about their objective. As Guam was behind the international dateline, at 4:45 a.m., on December 8, while it was still December 7 in Hawaii, the governor received word about the attack on Pearl Harbor. A few hours later, at 8:27 a.m., the Second World War reached the Marianas, when Saipan-based Imperial Japanese Navy planes attacked the Marine barracks at Guam, Pitti Navy Yard, and islands radio stations. The air raids continued until 5 p.m., and during the attack, Japanese dive bombers hit the minesweeper USS Penguin outside Apra Harbor, killing one officer, and wounding several men, including the captain. Although the crew put up a fight, the ship was soon scuttled. Furthermore, bombers also hit the stationary oil depot ship, USS Robert L. Barnes. Although receiving substantial damage from the bombing and strafing, USS Robert L. Barnes did not sink. At the same time, the Pan American Airways Hotel received a direct hit, killing several employees, while the Standard Oil Company tank farm was set ablaze. Meanwhile, the governor ordered the arrest and jail of all Japanese nationalists on the island. The same night, 9 Saipan native infiltrators landed at Retidian Point, on the north end of the island, and 3 were apprehended. Under interrogation, they revealed that the Japanese were going to land the following morning, but they could not specify where. At 8:30 a.m., on December 9, the Japanese resumed air attack, bombing and strafing the previous day's targets. Furthermore, they attempted to bomb the governor's house in Agonia, and several villages, which resulted in civilian casualties. Knowing that the Japanese landing was imminent, McMillan ordered the Guam Insular Force, led by a few Marines, to secure government buildings in Agonia. At the same time, 122 Marines and some 50 crew members of the USS Penguin, along with the naval station personnel, dug in at the rifle range, east of the Marine barracks on Orte Peninsula, near Sume. The rest of the Marines and Insular Force were scattered, patrolling across the island. The garrison had no artillery, only a few Lewis machine guns, and various small arms. A 1903 Springfield bolt-action rifle was the standard issue. That evening, a Japanese invasion fleet of 4 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, 2 gunboats, 6 submarine chasers, 2 minesweepers, 2 destroyer tenders, and 10 transport ships left Saipan for Guam. At 2:15 a.m., on December 10, 1941, Japanese troops began landing on the island. The 370 men of the 2nd Missouri Special Naval Landing Force landed on Dunkers Beach on Agonia Bay, north of Agonia, while at the same time, the 1st Battalion of 144 Regiment landed on the north flank of Two-Man Bay, on the upper northwest coast, north of Dunkers Beach, and moved south towards Agonia. The 2nd Battalion landed at Talafofo Bay, on the lower east coast, and moved northwest, and the main force of the South Seas Detachment, with the 3rd Battalion of the 144 Regiment, landed on the southwest coast, near Maratso, and moved to attack the Marines at Sume, with an element sent to Pitti Navy Yard. When the first Japanese troops landed on the island, they met head-on with fleeing Chamorro civilians at Apurguan. For reasons unknown, 13 men, women, and children were fired upon and killed. At 4:45 a.m., forward elements of Missouri Special Naval Landing Force reached Agonia, where they faced Lewis machine gun fire, manned by Pedro Cruz and assisted by Ben Chargualaf, in front of Plaza de España, governor's headquarters. Soon, other Insular Force Guard members joined what became the violent exchange of fire, which lasted for an hour. Poorly equipped and outnumbered, Marines and Guardsmen made a valiant attempt to stop the Japanese advance at the plaza, but were quickly driven back. Governor McMillan realized that his tiny command was no match for the invasion force, and in order to prevent needless deaths among civilians and naval personnel, at 5:45 a.m., ordered a ceasefire. Finally, the island's government officially surrendered the island at 6 o'clock, making Guam the first piece of American territory to fall into Japanese hands. Meanwhile, no fighting occurred at the Marine barracks, but a few scattered skirmishes took place on the island, until word of the surrender spread later in the day. During the short fighting on the island, the Marines suffered 5 killed and 13 wounded. The Navy lost 8 men killed, while 4 Guam Insular Force Guards were killed, with a total of 22 Navy and Guam Insular Force wounded. About 30 islanders and 1 American civilian died in air attacks. Japanese losses were 1 dead and 6 wounded. Guamanians suffered greatly under the Japanese occupation. Besides renaming the island Omiyajima, meaning Great Shine Island, the Japanese also took control of the most privately owned real estate, agricultural produce, and livestock. American military personnel, and members of the Insular Force Guard, were held in the Agonia Cathedral until January 10, 1942, when 242 Marines, 159 Navy men, 5 nurses, and a number of civilians, were sent to various prisoner of war camps in Japan. However, not all Americans surrendered. 6 sailors fled to northern Guam, to hide in the thick jungles rather than surrender to the Japanese. 5 were eventually captured and executed. A U.S. Navy radioman, George Tweed, one of the original 6 men, managed to survive with the help of local Chamorros. They moved him from village to village, sometimes endangering their own families for his protection. The radioman managed to remain hidden until the summer of 1944, when he was picked up by the U.S. Navy ships, arrived in the area with the troops, ready to retake Guam.